There's a number sitting in someone's bank account right now that will never be touched. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not because the person is still young, not because they're still planning for the future, but because they're gone, dead, and the money outlived them. We don't talk about this. It's not in any personal finance course ever written. You won't find it in the bestseller section between the budgeting Bibles and the passive income playbooks sitting on the shelf. But it's happening at an enormous scale, quietly, invisibly, across millions of households in the developed world today. People are spending their entire working lives building financial fortresses they never actually live inside. Think about that. And the worst part, society celebrates them for it. The most disciplined savers are praised, even when it costs them everything. Today, we're going to challenge one of the most deeply embedded assumptions in modern financial culture as we know it. The idea that more savings always equals more success, because that belief, taken too far, quietly becomes something dangerous. There is a version of financial discipline that, taken to its extreme, becomes its own kind of poverty, a real one. A poverty of experience, a poverty of presence, a poverty that doesn't show up on any balance sheet until it's too late. Let's start with a simple question. What does it actually mean to be good with money? Most people think they know. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference, and grow your net worth over time. That's the accepted formula. That's the gold star. But here's where I think we've gone wrong. We've confused the instrument with the outcome, and that confusion is costing us dearly. A net worth figure is an instrument. It's a measurement. It tells you how many chips you've accumulated at the table, nothing more. But the whole point of the casino, the reason you're even sitting there, is to eventually cash those chips in for something real, for an experience, for a moment, for a person. That's the actual point. The chips were never supposed to be the destination. The moment we start treating the chip count as the end goal, we've lost the plot entirely, and most of us have lost it. Imagine you spend 30 years building something, a product, a business, a project, and then the day before it launches, you trash it. The work doesn't matter. The effort doesn't matter. The only thing that creates value is the moment the thing actually gets used by someone. Money works the same way. Unspent wealth is an unfinished sentence, labor that was completed but never redeemed, never exchanged for life. It represents life energy exchanged for a number that evaporated the moment the person who earned it stopped existing. That's the brutal truth. This isn't a philosophical abstraction, it's math, and the math, when you finally sit down and look at it clearly, is deeply uncomfortable. Here's something the financial industry never puts in its projections. Your capacity for experience declines with age. It's simply never mentioned. Not your wisdom, not your patience, not your emotional depth. Those can actually improve. But your raw physical ability to convert money into joy, that follows a curve, and the curve goes down. In your late 20s and 30s, your body is a remarkable machine built for adventure and recovery. You can hike a mountain and feel exhilarated, travel on a budget, sleep in uncomfortable places, eat street food at midnight without consequence, wake up the next morning ready to do it all again. Your resilience is high, your recovery is fast, your appetite for novelty is boundless. Fast forward 20 years. You still want those things. The desire doesn't fully disappear, but the logistics get heavier. Recovery takes much longer. The risk tolerance shrinks. The body starts to veto experiences the mind still craves. That gap between wanting and doing begins to quietly widen. And then, somewhere in your 70s or 80s, the gap between what you want and what your body permits becomes a kind of quiet grief. I've watched it happen in real families. Someone reaches retirement with everything they planned for, the savings, the security, the freedom, everything. And within a few years, the window starts closing. Not because of poverty, not because of poor planning, because of biology, plain and simple. The cruelest version of this story is when the money arrives on schedule, but the health doesn't show up with it. We already intuitively understand this in other areas of life. We don't wait until 70 to play with our children. We know the window closes. We don't delay learning an instrument by 30 years because we know neuroplasticity fades. We don't postpone athletic goals. The body has a timeline. But when it comes to spending, to converting stored wealth into actual lived experience, we suddenly pretend the timeline doesn't exist at all. We act as though $1 saved at 45 will deliver the same value at 85. It won't, and deep down, we already know it. There's another dimension here that almost nobody talks about, and it's honestly the one I find most compelling of everything we've covered. Experiences don't just happen and then disappear. They leave something behind. They create a long-term return on investment with no ticker symbol. When you have a formative experience, a journey, a challenge, a breakthrough, a moment of deep connection, you don't just get the experience itself. You get every future moment of remembering it. Every time you tell that story, every time a smell or a song pulls you back to that place, every time you recognize something about yourself that was shaped by that experience, the memory keeps paying dividends long after the moment has passed. The earlier you have the experience, the longer that return accumulates. This is the part most people completely miss when they do the math. A trip you take at 28 doesn't give you 1 week of joy. It gives you 60 years of references, stories, context, and identity. That's the compounding effect, but applied to memory rather than money. And memory, unlike a market, never crashes. It only deepens over time. Conversely, the experience you defer until retirement, the one you kept on the list, kept promising yourself, doesn't just cost you the ticket price. It costs you every year of return you could have been collecting, every story untold, every version of yourself that never got to be shaped by it. Delay is not neutral. Delay has a price. And unlike financial debt, the interest on deferred living is paid in something you can never recover: time. This reframes the entire conversation about treating yourself versus being responsible. It's not indulgence versus discipline. It never was. It's a question of timing. It's a question of when the investment in experience will generate the highest lifetime return. And by that measure, the younger you are, the higher the return on investment. One of the most common justifications for extreme saving is legacy, the desire to leave something behind for the next generation, a foundation, a head start. It's a genuinely noble impulse, but I think the execution is almost universally mistimed. And the data, when you look at it, tells a striking story. Here's the reality. Intergenerational wealth transfers, on average, happen when the recipient is in their late 50s or early 60s. That's when most people inherit. Now ask yourself honestly, what does a 58-year-old actually need from a windfall inheritance? The answer, in most cases, is probably not much. By that point, most people have already navigated the financially formative years of their lives. The career is established, the mortgage is nearly paid off, the children are grown and independent. The major financial turning points have already been reached or missed. The inheritance arrives decades too late to matter most. Contrast that with what $50,000 or $100,000 could mean to that same person at 32. The difference is almost incomprehensible. It could be the difference between renting indefinitely and owning a home. It could seed a business that changes the trajectory of an entire decade of life. It could eliminate student debt that's been quietly compressing every financial decision for years. It could fund a career risk that pays off enormously down the line. The money is the same amount. The impact is radically different, not because of investment returns, but because of timing relative to the recipient's life stage. If you genuinely want to help the people you love, the most powerful version of that is to give while you're still alive, to be present for the impact, to have the conversation about what the money is actually for, to watch it do the thing you always hoped it would do. That changes everything. That's not a financial transaction, that's a relationship. And it's only possible while you're still here, still present, to actually have it. So what does a better approach actually look like? It starts with a reframe, a fundamentally different question about what money is actually for. Instead of asking how much can I accumulate by the time I retire, ask what do I actually need to sustain a full life until the very end? And what is everything above that number meant to be doing? That second question is the one almost nobody ever seriously sits down to answer. This requires honest, uncomfortable math, not the aspirational kind where you imagine your net worth hitting some satisfying round number on a spreadsheet. The realistic kind, where you calculate what a dignified, comfortable, and engaged life actually costs, including healthcare, including emergencies, including the unpredictable things. Everything above that number isn't savings, it's deferred consumption. And if it never gets consumed, it was simply wasted energy, wasted life, full stop. This doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean living without a buffer or ignoring real risks. Longevity is a genuine financial risk and deserves genuine tools. Annuities, long-term care planning, healthcare-specific savings vehicles, these exist precisely to handle uncertainty without requiring you to hoard indefinitely out of fear. What it does mean is developing a different relationship with spending. Not spending as failure, not spending as weakness, but spending, when intentional, as the entire point. It also means thinking about your life in phases rather than as one long uniform accumulation period stretching from your first job to your last breath. Different life stages unlock different types of experience, and some of those experiences have hard expiration dates that no amount of money can later override. The physically demanding adventure that calls to you now won't wait forever. The window when your kids actually want to spend extended time with you is narrowing. The version of yourself who could have started that creative project, learned that language, built that community, that version of you has a shelf life too. The goal isn't to squeeze every dollar out of your lifetime. The goal is to squeeze every moment of aliveness out of your dollars at the right moments, in the right sequence, before the windows close. That is the entire point. That has always been the entire point. We just forgot somewhere along the way. I want to be direct about something because I think it needs to be said plainly. The cultural script we've been handed about money is not neutral. The script that tells us maximum accumulation equals maximum virtue, that script was not written with your well-being in mind. Not even close. It was written by an economic system that benefits when you consume less and produce more, when you defer gratification indefinitely, when you keep the machine running at full capacity without asking too many questions about where you're actually going, or whether the destination was ever really yours to begin with. Choosing to live fully, to spend intentionally, to invest in experience, to give generously while you're alive is, in a quiet way, a radical act. It's a refusal to be defined by your balance sheet, a refusal to let the accumulation become the identity, a refusal to mistake the map for the territory. This doesn't mean abandoning financial responsibility, it means expanding your definition of what responsible actually looks like in the context of one real human life. A responsible financial plan includes a plan to actually live, not someday, not eventually, now, while your body is capable and the people you love are present, while the experiences you want are still accessible, while the windows are still open, while the version of you who wants those things still exists and is waiting. The person who retires with exactly what they needed and used every bit of it to build a life of meaning, connection, and genuine enjoyment is not a financial failure. They are the closest thing to a genuine financial success story that I know, and it's time we started treating them that way. There's a question I think every person should sit with at least once a year, and it's not the one most financial advisors will ever think to ask you. Not how much did I save this year, not is my net worth trending in the right direction. Those questions are missing something fundamental and deeply human. The question is this: if I found out today that I had 5 years left, what would I be angry I hadn't done yet? Sit with that honestly. Not what would you regret spending money on, what would you regret not spending it on? That distinction is everything. That distinction is the whole conversation. Because that regret is already accumulating, quietly, on the other side of every not yet and every someday when we can afford it. It's growing right now. Every experience you passed on because the number in the account felt more real than the moment standing directly in front of you, that cost was real too. Wealth is not a destination, it's fuel, and fuel that sits unused in a tank while the journey goes unexperienced isn't prudence, it's a peculiar kind of tragedy. A tragedy dressed up in the language of responsibility, given a gold star by a culture that confused the instrument for the outcome and never looked back. The goal was never to be the wealthiest person in the cemetery. That was never the goal. Somewhere along the way, we just started acting like it was. The goal was to have lived so fully, given so generously, and experienced so deeply that by the time you reach the end, there's nothing left to save it for. That's not failure. That's not irresponsibility. That's not a cautionary tale. That, right there, is the whole point. It always was. It always will be.